Okay, so imagine feeling like just a tiny, insignificant cog in a massive institutional machine. We've all been there, right? Well, today in this We and Law Explainer, we're diving into one of the most incredibly empowering legal battles in recent educational history. We're looking at a historic Supreme Court of Nigeria judgment that absolutely redefines the relationship between a university and its students. It's an unbelievable story, so let's just jump right into it. 18 million Naira. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is the precedent-setting sum of compensatory damages ordered by the Supreme Court of Nigeria. And we're not talking about some regulatory fine or a slap on the wrist here. This is a direct, cold, hard cash payout awarded to a single student for the harm caused by his own university. But the numbers only tell half the story. The real question we gotta ask is, why? Seriously, how does one single student take on the sheer weight, power, and massive legal machinery of a federal institution, specifically the Federal University of Technology, Aquara, or FUTA, and actually win at the highest court in the land? It is the ultimate David versus Goliath story. And what makes this even crazier? The student, Mr. Abibielo Afolabi Victor, was a layman. He wasn't some high-powered corporate attorney. He was a self-represented citizen fighting for the grades he absolutely knew he earned, and he took that fight all the way to the top. Now, to truly understand the weight of that 18 million Naira award, we have to look at this excruciating timeline. Adebayo finished his mechanical engineering exams way back in 2007, but instead of celebrating, his true results were withheld, and he was slapped with an erroneous second-class lower, a 2-2. After literally years of writing letters and begging the university to just, remark his papers, he hit a total wall. So in 2011, he sued them at the High Court. He actually won there in 2017, but of course, the university appealed. The case dragged all the way through the Court of Appeal in 2019 and finally reached a dramatic conclusion at the Supreme Court. Guys, that is nearly 15 years of a man's life just completely placed on hold. And hidden inside these legal documents is a genuine personal catastrophe. When you read through the court records, you start to see the real-world cost of FUTA's delay, because the university point-blank refused to release his proper transcripts. Adebayo lost a fully funded master's degree scholarship to the UK. I mean, a literal life-changing opportunity just gone. The documents also outline years of health expenses and just unimaginable stress. So this wasn't some minor administrative glitch. This was a stolen future. The ultimate validation of his 15-year fight is the official Supreme Court record itself. In the end, Adebayo forced the university's hand. Thanks to the lower court orders he managed to secure, FUTA actually had to bring in external examiners to remark his scripts. And surprise, surprise, he was right all along. His true grades completely qualified him for a second-class upper, a 2-1. The Supreme Court eventually compelled the university to physically hand him his correct degree certificate and transcripts right there in open court. Talk about vindication. And let me tell you, the justices did not mince words. Justice Ogunwumiju delivered this absolutely searing rebuke in the lead judgment, calling out the university's invidious and a wholly cynical and deliberate disregard for the appellant's rights. See, the High Court had originally awarded Adebayo just 500,000 Naira for his suffering. Well, the Supreme Court looked at that amount, looked at the 15 years of emotional and physical torment, and basically declared it ridiculously low. They upgraded the compensation to 18 million Naira to properly reflect the university's complete and utter abandonment of their duties. Okay, real quick, before we get into the actual legal mechanics of exactly how the court justified this, which is fascinating, by the way, if you're finding this breakdown of your civic rights empowering, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. We put together these We and Law explainers to make sure you never have to face massive institutions blindly. Knowledge is literally power, so make sure you're subscribed. All right, let's get into the actual law here. FUTA's defense leaned super heavily on a long-standing legal tradition. Historically, courts are incredibly reluctant to step into the academic realm. There's this famous quote from past legal precedent stating that a university has an unlimited and unquestionable right, like God, to award certificates and degrees. Normally, the courts just say, hey, grading is for professors, not judges. Leave us out of it. So the really crucial point here is how the Supreme Court reconciled that quote-unquote godlike power with Adebayo's victory. They drew this massive, bold line between autonomy and impunity. Yes, universities have the autonomy to set academic standards. That's a given. But the court ruled that autonomy is absolutely not a shield for negligence, bias, or procedural unfairness. Being an autonomous institution doesn't mean you have a free pass to act with impunity and ruin a student's life without facing consequences. To actually enforce this accountability, the court leaned on a foundational concept in tort law known as the duty of care. Now, simply put, this is a legal obligation that requires you to take reasonable steps to prevent foreseeable harm to someone else. And the Supreme Court definitively affirmed that the very moment a university admits you as a student and cashes your tuition check, they owe you a strict, legally binding duty of care. Let's look at how this builds into practical application. The court didn't just toss out duty of care as some vague concept. They broke it down into this brilliant three-pillar framework. They declared that a university's responsibility to its students spans an academic duty, an administrative duty, and a pastoral duty. Let's unpack exactly what rights each of these guarantees you. Pillar number 1 is the academic duty. This essentially means you have a legally backed right to competent teaching and, critically in a day-bios case, a transparent and fair assessment system. The university has to act objectively. If they're just arbitrarily grading you or letting some personal bias tank your scores, they aren't just being tough professors, they are legally breaching their duty to you. Moving on to pillar number 2, the administrative duty. And wow, this is where FUTA failed catastrophically. Universities are legally bound to process your records, your transcripts, and your appeals correctly, and to do so within a reasonable time frame. Withholding a student's legitimate transcript for years on end and forcing them to travel back and forth endlessly just to get someone to look at a glaring error, that is a direct, massive violation of this administrative obligation. And this brings us to the third and final pillar, the pastoral duty. Honestly, this is a huge leap forward. The court explicitly recognized that institutions must consider how their actions impact a student's mental and physical welfare. They literally have a duty to protect students from foreseeable harm, and that explicitly includes unnecessary stress. Inflicting 15 years of trauma on a guy by stubbornly refusing to correct a simple grading error, that is a profound breach of pastoral care. So, because FUTA breached all of these duties, the court had to award compensatory damages. The law operates on this principle called restitutio in integrum, which is basically a fancy way of saying they need to restore a person to the position they would have been in if the wrong had never happened in the first place. That 18 million naira wasn't just pulled out of thin air. It was a carefully calculated legal remedy to compensate Adebayo for the physical pain, the immense emotional distress, and the sheer financial devastation of a lost international scholarship, all caused by the university's arrogance. Which brings us right to our final thought. For decades, the general assumption was that a university's power was absolute, that they were pretty much untouchable. But the Victor versus FUTA case, it changes everything. It answers this question loudly and clearly. The law holds them accountable. And even more importantly, empowered citizens who know their rights hold them accountable. Adebayo Victor proved that even a single student, armed with nothing but the truth, can move mountains. So it really makes you wonder, what other quote-unquote untouchable institutions in our society are overdue for a reality check? Think about that for a second, and I'll see you in the next explainer.